Good Monday morning, DawgNation. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. What could be better to start the week than looking back on a dominant Georgia win against an SEC East foe in South Carolina on the road, quieting a bunch of naysayers around the Georgia program in the wake of all of that, and then seeing Florida on Saturday night go down to Kentucky. You know, Eddie was loving that. So we're going to have a lot of fun today and all week. Chip Towers on the program later on. We'll get an update from everything happening in the Georgia locker room post-game on Saturday. We're glad you're with us as DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza, begins right now.
From DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I have to say I am incredibly satisfied here on this Monday morning. Loved what I saw from Georgia in a 41-17 victory against South Carolina on Saturday. And, you know, I think that one of the things that I heard from a lot of people before the game and then sort of in the similar conversation after the game is that we may be entering into an era in which Georgia football is just sort of fairly easy to predict. Because, you know, the one thing that I said a lot on the program last week is that I didn't take South Carolina's upset bid against Georgia very seriously at all, because I looked at the dominance of Georgia's offensive line, what you saw from the beef and the overall talent level of those guys that play up front for Georgia, and in comparison to what South Carolina is going to do with the defensive line. And I simply said there's just not enough there for South Carolina to establish anything against Georgia. Georgia will push these guys around, and Georgia will ultimately get the victory. Then on Saturday night, you know, a lot of you there in Columbia were like, hey, BA, that's exactly what happened. You called it. And, you know, I don't know that makes me particularly smart. I just think that Georgia football is sort of entering into an era in which we can sort of know what to expect. You can look at the way that the Georgia players look in their uniforms getting off the bus. You can look at the way the South Carolina or whatever opponent is sort of getting off the bus. You can sort of look at all of that, and you're going to be able to see, you know, kind of what's what here. And obviously just the look of Georgia, the feel of Georgia is a group overall, I think, that was, you know, sort of destined to sort of handle South Carolina in the way that it did. And frankly, probably in doing so, you probably sort of put to bed some of the ancient conversations of, oh, be careful when you're Georgia going to South Carolina. Oh, bad things have happened for this program in spots like this. A lot of that other sort of, you know, mealy mouth, I think is the way that my southern ancestors would have said it. A lot of mealy mouth talk about, you know, what Georgia might not be able to do. Clearly, you know, whatever version of Georgia you remembered from the past, this is not that version of Georgia. And with all that in mind, what Kirby Smart had to say after the game is all the more interesting and all the more impressive because, yes, South Carolina did put up a bit of a fight there, a bit in the first half, but in the second half, it was for the most part all Georgia. And the strength of the Georgia offensive line that we talked about a lot last week here on our program, and I wrote about even at DawgNation.com, that showed up in a big way. And that identity that Georgia's establishing is one that satisfies Kirby Smart, too. Here's the coach.
As far as the offensive line wearing them down, I think that comes from trying to create an identity. I mean, we believe in running the ball, and we believe in play action. We believe in being able to open it up and throw it. We want balance, but it takes its toll now. I watch our offensive line play against our defensive line, and I think you ask anybody in the country, when you can break somebody's will physically running the ball, it's very demoralizing. And that's what I felt like happened in the second half.
Yeah, you saw that on Saturday, right? You saw a South Carolina crowd get its will broken. They were heading for the exits. I tweeted that picture out. Many of you had fun with that. The South Carolina team sort of had its will broken because, listen, there's just nothing you can do about physical dominance, right? I mean, you know, you can't coach around that. There's no, like, ingenious coaching decision that's going to completely neutralize that. The bigger, stronger team is virtually always going to win, or at least have a great chance of winning. And once again on Saturday, heading into that game against the Gamecocks, it was just sort of obvious on paper that Georgia was the bigger, stronger team. And that's exactly the way that the ultimate storyline in this game plays out. And Kirby Smart, you know, can be forgiven here if he's also a bit satisfied by the fact that something he's been working now for the better part of 2+ seasons to build at Georgia is finally starting to take shape. The kind of thing where he does know what he's going to get from his team on a per game basis. There are very few surprises here for Georgia. And as a fan, which I am, and if you're listening and watching right now, you are as well, it feels good for a change not to be the finesse team in a game, right? I mean, because that's what South Carolina is. And listen, we know, Will Muschamp a little bit around here. We obviously, know what he's all about. How much does he hate that, you think? Now, he's not going to admit that in a post-game press conference. He's not going to talk a lot about that. but how much does he hate the fact that he's got to be the finesse, almost Big 12 style team against Georgia's, brute force there along the line of scrimmage. And, we'll get to the defense later on. They certainly did plenty there as well. Muschamp looks across the field at his good buddy Kirby Smart, and there's got to be a degree of professional jealousy here that Kirby Smart's getting to coach the kind of team and has built the kind of program that if Will Muschamp had the same resources he would do at South Carolina, he's sort of forced to play a different brand of football, and it'll be good enough to beat a lot of teams, just not good enough to match head-to-head with the Georgia Bulldogs. And what's even more amazing about this Georgia offensive line from Saturday is that it does a lot of what it accomplished without Andrew Thomas in the game. Thomas does leave with the injury. We'll talk to Chip Towers more about this later on in our show, including the prognosis for what to expect in terms of announcements on this moving forward. Kirby Smart did offer a little bit, though, on the Thomas injury after the game. Here is the immediate medical diagnosis that Kirby Smart got on Andrew Thomas. Here's Kirby postgame.
As of right now, it's an ankle sprain. We don't know to what extent, how bad it's an ankle sprain. So I don't know much right now other than that.
I think the general consensus I got from a lot of Georgia fans, we'll see if Chip Towers also agrees with this, that while you don't want to see Thomas get hurt at all, obviously if you have your choice between ankle sprain or some sort of issue with knee, you'll take ankle every single time, and I'm no medical professional, but that does make at least some sense to me. And obviously I'm going to join the rest of DawgNation here and give Cade Mays, the freshman who sort of steps in there at left tackle, a ton of credit. Mays was absolutely just blistering people when he comes in the game. That's a guy that's good enough to play. I mean, he would probably start, Mays would, for 12 of the 14 SEC teams. Not right now a starter for Georgia. Maybe he's not a starter for Alabama, but I think that Mays would be a surefire day one starter at some position for every other team in this SEC. So he stepped in and played well and clearly sort of showed all of that off. And I'm glad that Georgia's got Mays, but that doesn't change the fact that if Andrew Thomas is missing, if he's hobbling hobbled here a bit, there is something to lose there for Georgia. Even if Mays comes in and plays, very strong, very well, you are sacrificing some of your depth there. So we'll obviously pay close attention to what the updates are on Andrew Thomas as they come throughout the week with Chip Towers later on. Kirby Smart will address the media as he does every Monday today at noon, so keep close to DawgNation.com for more on that. And then kind of finally here off the top of the show in terms of the overall tone of the game. You heard Kirby Smart there a moment ago, talking about, the demoralizing demeanor that Georgia establishes here, the physicality that Georgia showed, almost a quiet level of dominance. I will give you a quick backstory here. My buddy Connor Riley, one of our producers around here, he and I were going to be set up right there on the field immediately after the game to sort of capture the celebration. Virtually every time a team wins in the SEC, there's a lot of flag waving. You run over and you celebrate with the band and the fans who had all made their way down to the front of the stadium on Saturday. But when the game ended, there was very little celebration from Georgia whatsoever. They met at the middle, they had the post-game prayer, and then they just walked back to the locker room, business being taken care of. The business trip was over, and they seemed eager to sort of turn the page and move on to the next chapter. Very, very different than the clown show that came out of Columbia, South Carolina over the last couple of weeks. Whether it be Deebo Samuel embarrassing himself at the things that he said about DeAndre Baker, or Torrey Gurley, a total unknown commodity, a guy that I don't even remember playing at South Carolina, who got a lot of national attention this week for guaranteeing a victory against Georgia. Georgia, according to Kirby Smart, is right now just not going to be motivated by those kinds of things. Here's more from Kirby.
We didn't sell that or preach that. I mean, they put something up in the weight room, a sticker, but I wanted discipline and composure. And playing in this environment, it's a lot more about discipline and composure. Sometimes when you get into all that disrespect, you get chippy, you make bad decisions. I knew it was going to be a chippy kind of game because both staffs are intense and both programs are physical, but we didn't want our guys getting stupid penalties, and I thought they managed themselves really well in that regard. I don't like using disrespect as a motivating factor.
So listen, Kirby Smart's going to say that. We've said before that we think there's a process by how this stuff sort of gets introduced. I think it does get introduced by the strength and conditioning program, but overall, I agree with the tone that Kirby Smart establishes there. Deebo Samuel really looks foolish for saying bad things about DeAndre Baker or pretending not to know who DeAndre Baker is when Baker establishes himself so strong at the beginning of the game with an interception return for a touchdown. And for Samuel to say those things as sort of a preface to a blowout, I think makes him look bad too. By comparison, Georgia does look all business. And maybe we didn't get to see the celebration from Georgia on the field after the game that we wanted to see, but this looks like right now a Georgia team that's not in much of a mood for celebrate. They've got a whole lot more in terms of goals and objectives beyond just beating South Carolina. And based on the performance we saw against the Gamecocks, this team looks more than capable of accomplishing all of those goals. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. Hello to you, and thanks for being with us live on video, 10 a.m. on the DawgNation Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter feed, on the radio at noon, on Athens Sports Radio 960 through FM in podcast form, Apple Podcasts, the Google Podcast Player, the world-famous DawgNation.com, SoundCloud, everywhere else in between. Rested on the couch all day yesterday, watching a lot of football after having been in Columbia the day before, and stayed indoors and enjoyed some air conditioning and a little Marco's Pizza as well. And if you did the same thing on your football Sunday, I know you enjoyed that. And if you took advantage of the great offer from Marco's Pizza, you're happy about that too. 2 medium, 2 topping pizzas for just $6.99 each. It's every store, every day, the Italian way. There is no coupon to clip, no promo code to remember, just good, authentic Italian quality pizza. So say hello primo by going to marcos.com and taking advantage of that order. I will say I went to bed early last night. Did not realize until I woke up this morning that Green Bay came back and beat Chicago last night. What a game that was, and nice to see Roquan Smith get a sack in his, first play in an NFL uniform there for the Chicago Bears. So cool stuff there around the pros on Sunday. And if you enjoyed that with a Lamarco's Pizza sitting in your lap, I know you were very happy doing that. As promised, we'll get Chip Towers here coming up in just a moment. Before that, though, let's do our Around the Doghouse here on a Monday, brought to you by friends at Pella Window and Door. And I want to deal with, one of the cool things we get to do here around DawgNation, when we do our Northside Hospital post-game show, you really get a chance in the moment to sort of reflect on the question that's being asked more so than any other after the game. And it's just sort of nice for me to know what the consensus among DawgNation is in terms of what's interesting, what's not, what was important, what's not, what was good, what was bad. And even on a day when Georgia dominates South Carolina, it was the final 41-17, even in a day when Georgia dominates South Carolina, I would say, now maybe Michael and Connor, who are monitoring the show from a producer standpoint, maybe they feel a bit different, but I would say that the question we got to ask more than anything else on our postgame show on Saturday was, where was Demetrius Robertson? Robertson doesn't come up with a catch in the game, not targeted, I think, even on a passing attempt at any point in time in the game. Through 2 games in his Georgia career, Demetrius Robertson has no catches, has the one handoff against Austin Peay that goes back for a touchdown, but no catches. A lot of Georgia fans were sort of left wondering, okay, so what does that mean for Demetrius Robertson? Why aren't we seeing him more involved in the Georgia offense? Now, Kirby Smart was asked about this in his post-game press conference on Saturday, and as you might imagine, Kirby Smart was not really much in the mood to entertain the notion of why aren't we seeing more highlight reel opportunities for the transfer of Robertson. Here's a pretty terse response from Kirby.
He played a ton. He just got in situations where he was blocking. He had a couple times where the route where that pass is called and the read went the other way. But I saw him out there a lot.
So listen, I have a few things here. First of all, I do sort of understand where the fans are coming from on this, because I think there is this natural curiosity of a guy. And listen, I'm very guilty of this. I obviously hyped up Robertson in a big way. Coming into Georgia, I thought at the time that he was going to be Georgia's leading receiver. I'm still not so sure. I won't end up being proven right on that. But through 2 games, we haven't seen him involved in that way, and there's going to be a curiosity about that. That curiosity is going to remain even on a day like Saturday, where MECOLE HARDMAN established himself in such a big way. And maybe this is just an example of it's easy to sort of look like the leading receiver at Cal because you don't have a lot of competition for those touches. But at Georgia, there's a lot more wealth to be spread around here. And maybe Robertson's numbers are going to suffer at Georgia a bit just in comparison to MECOLE HARDMAN, who was all over the place on Saturday. That's certainly the case. I think this is also probably true as well. That one of the best things about Georgia is kind of also maybe going to be something that's not always the most enjoyable for fans. As this program continues to build its depth on offense, a repertoire of playmakers, the likes of which that Georgia's probably never seen, and very few teams in the SEC have ever seen it on one team at one time. It could be James Cook at the running back position. It could be DeAndre Swift. It could be Elijah Holyfield. We saw on Saturday can also be Brian Herrien at the wide receiver position. Maybe it's Terry Godwin who has the big game. Maybe it's MECOLE HARDMAN, or maybe it's Demetrius Robertson, which is to say nothing about the former 5-star tight end Isaac Nada, the fan favorite Charlie Warner, who was a big-time performer up in North Georgia before coming to UGA. There's just a lot of potential weapons here. But that means that in most games, a lot of those guys just aren't going to get as many touches as a lot of fans want. The notion of that sort of fantasy football mentality where every one of these guys is sort of collecting the big, gaudy stats and sort of becomes the kind of player that young kids want to put posters on their wall. a deep Georgia offense just may not produce as many of those guys. Now, will it produce enough points to win and win in convincing fashion? More often than not, I think that's probably going to be the case. But guys like Robertson, it just may be a case where the stats aren't as good here in a big-time program like Georgia as they would be out west, where it's really more about collecting stats than it is oftentimes collecting wins. So ultimately, Kirby Smart's perspective is probably right. He's on the field. He's doing what he needs to be doing. The ball could have gone to him. It was just a different read. Smart's assessment here is probably correct, but I also kind of understand the perspective of fans here a bit as well, who may have been hoping to see a little bit more of Robertson involved in the Georgia offense. The good news, though, is it's a dominant Georgia win, and Robertson certainly factored in that, even if he wasn't getting the catches. And Around the Doghouse here on DawgNation Daily on Mondays is brought to you by our friends at Pella Window and Door, who can help you equip your house with energy-efficient windows and doors. They're family-owned and operated. They're right here in Georgia, which means you get the local service, but it's also backed by a national company. And right now, a great offer through September 13th. You can get 40% off qualifying installations with 0% APR for 48 months. You know the Pella Window and Door offers the best lifetime warranty, top-of-the-line equipment, and unparalleled expertise. So go to PellaSoutheast.us, and you can submit a few appointment dates, and sometimes they're convenient for you. And a Pella representative is going to contact you to confirm, or you can give them a call in their Dunwoody showroom at 404-445-2979. That number, once again, 404-445-2979. Pella Window and Door of Georgia. It's viewed to be the best. Somebody else that we think's the best around here is our buddy Chip Towers from DawgNation.com. He had great coverage of the Georgia win against South Carolina. Let's talk to him more about that right now here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Yeah, busy day in Columbia, South Carolina on Saturday. A guy who was on top of all of it was our buddy Chip Towers. He joins us here on DawgNation Daily right now. And Chip, I know it's probably, I would say that you've been obviously going to more games than I have. Maybe the hottest game, certainly I can remember in a long time, among the hottest that I've ever attended. And I'm sure you'd probably agree the same thing. I think it impacted the South Carolina crowd probably a bit as well.
Yeah, it probably did. I mean, it doesn't seem like anyway that I've ever been over there in early September wasn't like that. It's really, really hot. I mean, you know, it's hot in the South in early September, period. Columbia is the hot area of the country, and then Williams-Brice Stadium is basically built out on a treeless plain, you know, that's surrounded by asphalt parking lot, you know, the fairgrounds, and it's just hot. And then you got a sand-based, you know, Bermuda sod field, so you know all the factors make it a really, really hot place, and you know certainly Saturday was no different. That's 2 weeks in a row. I mean, Sanford Stadium was incredibly hot the previous week as well. I guess there's been a couple of times over there when it stormed like crazy, where maybe it wasn't that hot, but the storms were usually a result of you know all the heat that's been in the area. But obviously Georgia stood up to it very well. South Carolina didn't stand up to it quite as well, and certainly that was a third quarter for the ages, and Georgia took care of business.
All right, let's talk about a lot of things here, and you mentioned third quarter of the ages. I'll sort of get to that halftime adjustment storyline in just a moment. Let me start with Andrew Thomas, who we did speak briefly about before you joined us in the program today. We're recording this on a Monday morning. Kirby Smart will speak to the media in a little less than 2 hours from right now. I imagine he'll be asked about Andrew Thomas again in terms of the ankle sprain that he suffered on Saturday. We'll find out if there's more details forthcoming. It seems like the consensus from a lot of fans, Chip, is better ankle sprain than anything involving a knee, and also a great job by Cade Mays kind of filling in his stead. What was your overall take on Thomas's injury? And if you are willing to sort of offer some sort of prognosis, we'll take that from you as well, I guess.
Yeah, well, you know, we'll find out some details from Kirby. If somebody else doesn't ask, I can promise DawgNation I'll ask. But I would imagine that'll be one of the first questions in today's news conference. And, yeah, I mean, I do believe it's much better that it's an ankle sprain rather than any kind of knee. You know, immediately when he went down, I was thinking, golly, man, that sucks. And I was thinking, for some reason, that just Trenton Sturdivant popped in my head, because if you remember, Brandon, and I know you were paying attention to those, Trenton Sturdivant was as good of a tackle as Georgia has ever had. He just had bad knees for whatever reason, and after starting his entire freshman season, he had the first of what I think ended up being like 3 knee injuries and could never play again. And I was just hopeful that because it's not just that because Andrew Thomas is a good player and he helps Georgia, but I mean he's a really good guy, a really good citizen. I wrote about him last week. You know, coming out there and speaking at Georgia's West End dedication at Sanford Stadium, and he's just a really impressive guy. So you're like, oh man, please, I hope that doesn't befall this kid. But an ankle is definitely better than a knee. Now, the ankles can be, problematic and linger, and especially when you try to come back from them really quick. But again, Georgia's schedule is just really ideal in a lot of different respects. But I mean, I would imagine you won't see him play a lick. Maybe you will, but I wouldn't think you'd see him play any against Middle Tennessee State. And then the second part of that equation, which you touched on there for a second, I mean, Cade Mays, that was very revealing to me on several different levels. It was revealing to everybody. In fact, I was talking to Lamont Gilliard about it after the game. I said, were you surprised to see Cade Mays come in? And he said, well, not really. I said, but did you know that he was going to be the next guy up? And he's like, absolutely not. And this is why Sam Pittman and Georgia does all that cross-training on the line. They've got in their head, they know on the board somewhere, if this guy goes down, then this guy comes in. And so that was an answer for everybody on if Andrew Thomas goes out at left tackle, then Cade Mays comes in. They wasted no time of pulling that 42 jersey on him, letting him put his 77 back on there and trotting him out there at left tackle. And I focused on him a lot after that, and he played very, very well in the left tackle situation. Just another one of those gems that Georgia has brought in on the offensive line through recruiting. So, yeah, that was very revealing that Cade Mays was the first guy in and not, DeMarcus Hayes or any of those other guys that they had the option of putting in.
At DawgNation.com, you gave your game ball for the game to wide receiver MECOLE Hardman, and why would you not? He had a great performance, really showed blazing speed, and really a sort of a go-to threat type for the Georgia offense against South Carolina. Was that the start of something we're going to see for the rest of the year? Does he now step out in front of Demetrius Roberts, who we spoke about before you joined us, Terry Godwin, who's been injured? Is he going to be the focal point of the passing game now, or is this just his turn, and maybe in future weeks when Georgia's tested, it'll go to a different wide receiver? Is this still a wide receiver by committee, in other words, whether Kirby Smart said it was in August, or is Hardman now the lead dog there?
Well, I think in a lot of ways, Hardman is your lead dog right now. And, it's not really hard to see, his tremendous speed. I mean, it's just unmatchable in most secondaries. So he is, one missed tackle away from a touchdown every time he touches the ball. First off. Now, second off, now he plays slot back, okay? So there's not, you can't get the ball to him all the time, so he's not going to, that's never going to be the case in Georgia. And I think we're, as we're all seeing, Georgia has a lot of weapons on offense. So, the ball distribution is part and parcel of what gives MECOLE Hardman big play opportunities, right? I mean, you just, you don't really target him all that much, but I mean, between hitch route, the counter, / jet sweep, and then being able to hit him downfield, he's a triple threat. So, yeah, I mean, I think we're witnessing the maturation of MECOLE Hardman as a receiver. He gets it now. And the funniest thing, I think I got this in something I was writing about, but Jake Braun just lit up when I asked him about MECOLE Hardman after the game, and he says every time MECOLE comes to the sideline, he's like, I'm open. You can get me on the, he just is begging for the football all the time. And that's what you want. I mean, this is a guy who's confident. He's really gotten bigger and stronger. So he's more of a tackle breaking threat than he used to be. And then he's just house. Anytime he touches it can be house. Now you touched on it, and I was listening to you on Demetrius Robertson. And I think what we're seeing there in Demetrius is just trying to fit in. If we know nothing else about Kirby Smart and Georgia's offensive philosophy, you've got to be able to do more than catch the ball and run with it in Georgia's offense. Yep. Because Georgia has plenty of guys who can do that. You got to be able to do all the other things. So I think with Demetrius Robertson, it's going to take a minute, right, before he gets all the checks in out of the hot reads that you have when you come in there at receiver and the blocking proponent of it. I mean, I don't know. I didn't watch it, but I tell you what, Kirby, wasn't accurate about. He was in there a ton. He wasn't in there a ton. We watched the game. He was in there a little bit, and he came in at garbage time. So that's a fact, Jack. So for whatever reason, it doesn't say Demetrius Robertson is a bust or anything like that. It's just that Georgia has a lot of options, and a lot of those options are much more learned and comfortable in the system probably right now than Demetrius Robertson is. But Demetrius Robertson is what he is, and he's going to be a part of this offense, and it's a matter of time before we see him get one catch, but I started to say a few catches, and that'll come in due time.
So Georgia does something on Saturday, Chip, that it did a lot of last year, which is essentially just suffocate opponents in the third quarter. And for the most part, I have a tendency to sort of downplay what looks like an obvious narrative of, oh, Georgia's good at halftime adjustments. That's why they're so good in the third quarter. For the most part, I think some of that kind of stuff is not as true as it sort of obviously seems. And yet when it keeps happening over and over again, including on Saturday, you have to wonder, I mean, what is this team doing at halftime? Because clearly the early stages of the third quarter set the tone for what ended up being a blowout. Is this just a matter of depth sort of showing up over time, physical dominance, conditioning sort of showing up over time? Or do you think that Kirby Smart really is pushing some sort of button there at the half?
Yeah, I think it's twofold. You know, as I say often, you know, the truth usually lies somewhere in between, and I think that's the case when Kirby downplayed halftime adjustments on Saturday and said all we did was just kind of rededicate ourselves to the run and being physical, and they felt like that, you know, South Carolina was sucking wind a little bit at the end of the half, and so we need to take care of the will. But that, as I wrote, you know, that in and of itself is an adjustment of sorts. And look, it ain't smoke and mirrors. I mean, going back and looking at last season, I wrote about this. I'll have to dig this stat back up, but I wrote last year's Georgia was making a run to the national championship. You know, Georgia's second half, in particular, third quarter, outscoring opponent. You know, and that has to do, I mean, I think it's like everything else that we see under the Kirby Smart administration. They, you know, very organized, and they have a plan at halftime, and they get in there and you know, they're talking about what's going right, what's going wrong. Let's get it up here. Let's think about how we're going to attack this in the second half. And, you know, here's the other part of that equation at halftime. Yes, you know, Georgia was more physical and ran the ball, but let's not lose sight of they also had 2 straight 3-and-outs on offense and on defense. South Carolina's offense was making some hay in the first half throwing the football, so they made adjustments as well. So what you had was Georgia come out, drive the ball, run-oriented, score, 3-and-out. Drive the ball, run-oriented, score, 3-and-out. Drive the ball, score, ball game. I mean, it was just so it's just where we are right now, Brandon. I know it puts chills on your chill bumps on you when you think about it sometimes. But Georgia's in a really good place because they got better personnel and they got good coaching, and you know, you're going to see that a lot. You're going to see them come out in the second half. Same thing with Missouri. I fully expect Missouri to hang with Georgia for a half, but their depth and the halftime adjustments aren't going to be able to stand up to what Georgia's doing. That's my prediction 2 weeks out, you know?
We got more from Chip Towers coming up, and, of course, on Saturday night, Kirby Smart used one of his classic catchphrases again. He talked about how he wants to see Georgia keep chopping. He said that a bunch in 2017, and obviously around here, keep chopping has 2 different meanings. When it comes to the Georgia Bulldogs, that's Kirby Smart's desire to see the team keep running the football. But also, while Georgia's doing all that, don't forget the Braves are chopping themselves as well on the baseball field, taking 3 of 4 from the Arizona Diamondbacks over the weekend. 3 home runs in the 9th yesterday. 25th home run of the season for Ronald Acuna as well. And coming up this Friday, the final homestand of the 2018 regular season begins as the Braves make a push towards the postseason against Washington, St. Louis, and then the division rival Phillies. And those games, by the way, there in September could decide the National League East as the Braves get back to the postseason again. I've been to SunTrust Park a bunch this season. The atmosphere has been incredible, and I know that the best yet is to still come here in September against the Cardinals and the Marlins, of course, the Phillies, as the Braves get back to the postseason. So they're in San Francisco starting tonight. And then the homestand begins on Friday, and the Braves need you at SunTrust Park. And if you want to enjoy some great baseball, now is the time to do it as the Braves look to get back in the postseason, beat up on the on those stinking Phillies, and get back into the postseason. Homestand starts on Friday, so make sure you check that out. Atlanta Braves, chop on. All right, Chip, let me get back to Georgia here for a moment and talk about Rodrigo Blankenship. And obviously Blankenship's a huge fan favorite, but even still, he may be a bit of an unsung hero because if you want to make a list of why Georgia sort of coasts on Saturday by the time you get to the fourth quarter, the fact that Blankenship has become a total guarantee to put the ball in the end zone and really give Deebo Samuel or whatever future returner Georgia faces this season, to give those guys no chance to bring the ball out of the end zone to a kickoff return, that is just becoming a huge weapon for Georgia. And, Chip, the fact that it's so dependable makes it even more valuable, I think.
Yeah, it really is the maturation of Rodrigo Blankenship that we've witnessed has been really a great story. And it started off with, the quirky rec spec guy, the walk-on that everybody was rooting for. And then, and then it morphed into, Rodrigo basically answering his coach's challenge and saying he wanted to see him have better range and kick the ball a little deeper. And each time, Kirby Smart issued a challenge, he answered it. He wins a scholarship, so it's a feel-good story. But where he is now, where he's just a weapon. I mean, he's just like, Carlson over at Auburn. He comes out there. I mean, right now, he goes trotting out there, and I don't know about everybody else, but, 45-yard, and I'm like, yeah, he's got this, and he just knocks it straight through, and his touchbacks have rendered kickoffs there was, a big part of South Carolina's game is their returns game. They had 0 return yards on Saturday. So, that goes to the punter as well. But yeah, Rodrigo is a great story. And the best thing about it is just such a good lesson for young kids out there and everything else that, rather than getting mad, and there was a little controversy at the beginning, about all the challenges and everything and Kirby's reticence to offer a scholarship. He just went out and each thing he was challenged for, he went out and did. And he got stronger at this point. If you look at Rodrigo, I mean, the kid's 6'2". He's listed at 190 pounds. I would imagine he's every bit of 200 at this point. Mm-hmm. Works out with the team, has gotten stronger, and it's been and at this point, so you can just go ahead and put a check in the column when you're breaking down special teams. With whoever Georgia's playing, they're either going to have the advantage or they're going to be at the very least a push with whoever they happen to play.
Chip, let me finish with this. Kibo Weir mentioned this in our Facebook comments section a moment ago, the performance from Richard LeCounte on Saturday. Now, there's so many other players I could ask you about, and over the course of the next few months, I'm sure I will, but I want to make sure we single out LeCounte here for a moment before I say goodbye to you. This is a guy that had gotten some criticism from Kirby Smart back in the summer. I think most of us said Kirby wouldn't be this public about it if he didn't truly believe in LeCounte. And I think on Saturday you saw an example of why apparently Kirby believed in LeCounte as much as he did. This was one of the real stars from Georgia's 2017 class, and so far, based on what I saw in his second game as a sort of a full season starter against the Gamecocks, he's absolutely living up to the hype. This young man, I think, has a chance to really be special, and Saturday, I think, was more proof of that.
Yeah, you talked about that game ball, which I gave to MECOLE HARDMAN, and as I was going through the game and trying to consider, because I have to commit to that so I can start writing by the fourth quarter. Richard LeCounte was one of the guys I was considering. He just had a fantastic ball game. DeAndre Baker, obviously, could have easily had a game ball. And then, the other guy we were just talking about, Rodrigo Blankenship, all four of those guys were deserving of game balls. And Richard LeCounte, let me tell you, he's just a really exciting guy to watch. You got an idea, anytime a coach starts coming out and is openly critical like that, it's the old saying, like your dad taught you in Little League. It's the fact that he's paying attention means he expects something from you. And boy, that's the case with Richard LeCounte. You and I were talking in the press box. And if you're listeners right now, if you haven't done it, dial up Richard LeCounte's highlights from high school, from Liberty County High School, because it's kind of like wow, how many long touchdowns did this kid have? Because he kind of played center field as a safety down there at Liberty County. He played, quarterback or receiver or whatever Liberty County wanted him to play, and just he's a fantastic returner. I don't know if he'll ever do that for Georgia at some point, because Georgia has such a ridiculous riches in the returner realm, but he's a great returner as well. And so you saw how many times he got his hands on the ball Saturday. This one is a little out of bounds, and that one's a little out of bounds. But it's just a matter of time. I mean, I think he's gonna have a lot of picks for Georgia, and he may threaten some records before it's over, because he's playing that position that Dominic Sanders did, and I think he's just a little bit faster than Dominic, and and he's got unbelievable ball skills, as they say, because he really knows how to catch it, and I think he's going to have a lot of picks this year. He's going to be a good weapon for Georgia for a couple of years to come now, too.
Yeah, I think you're right about that, Chip. It was really fun to be with you in Columbia on Saturday. I loved reading your words there to DawgNation.com. I know you've got a lot of great stuff planned here this week, including reaction to what Kirby Smart has to say later on today with his press conference there at noon. So we'll check that out at DawgNation.com, and looking forward to speaking to you back here again on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza very soon.
Looking forward to it. See you, bud.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
All right, couple things about what Chip had to say, and then I'll dive into the SEC Through here. Let me start with Richard LeCounte here for a moment. I want to be, very complimentary of the defensive backs that have been at Georgia in recent years, but I think one of the hallmarks of what you would say about most of those guys is what made them very good was they did more with less. Georgia's had a history of, hey, here's a former walk-on or a former three-star or a former, less than, totally heralded recruit, and that guy comes to Georgia secondary and sort of plays above that status in the field. And guys like that should be given a lot of credit for making more of themselves than their pre-career prediction would have sort of expected. But I think one of the things you're enjoying right now, if you don't mind me being very candid, what it looks like to see a defensive back do more with more. What it looks like to see, instead of a defensive back who's kind of a plucky underdog who kind of emerges when very little is expected, to see a guy who maybe has all the tools and has all the specs, kind of put that together pretty early in his career here. At least what I saw from Richard LeCounte on Saturday, that's an example of that. We already know that he has the capabilities of being a vocal leader. Kirby Smart wanted to make sure he had his focus and attention where it needed to be before the start of the season, and gosh, I'd be shocked to find out if the game film, when the coaches watch it, doesn't speak pretty well of LeCounte on that. All right, one more point here from Chip, and then I promise we'll do a little bit on the Florida loss, because, oh boy, did I enjoy that one on a Saturday night. Chip mentioned the idea of MECOLE HARDMAN being kind of a slot receiver, and so therefore, maybe some of the options that he has for his wide receiver position in terms of the overall numbers he can put up might be somewhat limited. Now, I understand where Chip's coming from on that. It makes me think, though, about the Big 12, which I have been very honest about before. I think is an inferior brand of football to what is played in the SEC. But one of the things I do like in the Big 12 is they'll throw deep to slot receivers, right? They'll let those guys run the deep routes, and they'll kind of use that as another deep threat. I'd love to see Georgia sort of add that dimension to its offense here as well, because at a certain point, whether it be Demetrius Robertson, I think I put myself in the category of fans with who wants to see more from. At a certain point, you'd love to really sort of see that continued vertical threat added to what is a really good Georgia running game. Muschamp talked about this before the game on that like it's like basically a film room thing he did with the South Carolina folks, about how Georgia runs these sort of like compacted offensive sets where the receivers, instead of being spread out wide, are kind of compacted in because they use them for crackback blocks and things like that. I just love to see that vertical threat continue to be a part of that, because I think that Fromm can make that pass. All right, with that said, let me do the SEC through here for a moment. And the one thing I said over and over again, and I've said now for weeks and weeks and weeks, is that people think that I'm biased when it comes to saying that Florida was not going to be very good. But here's, because y'all know, I got Eddie on the set here. We do the Gator Hater Countdown at the end of the show. I do truly believe that the best thing a Georgia fan could do is hate those lousy, stinking Gators. From that standpoint, I'm very clear on that. But I don't think it clouds my judgment. I told you going into this game that Florida's not good. And I think it's going to be proven more and more throughout the rest of the season here as well. My bias doesn't cause me to say that. My bias causes me to enjoy it when it's proven true. And boy, you better believe that on Saturday night when we were in Columbia after the Georgia-South Carolina game, tuning in to watch that Florida-Kentucky game, and Kentucky gets its first win in Florida in 31 tries. How enjoyable was that to watch the Florida fans have to squirm their way out of the swamp on that? Just beautiful stuff. I think that Dan Mullen has sold Florida a false bill of goods. That roster is as weak as water, and they got more losses to come before the season's done. And if you're a Georgia fan, it's almost like you hope Florida doesn't realize what its true problem actually is: the lack of talent. Mullen's not going to be able to coach these guys up. There's no magic trick to be pulled here. But because the longer Florida goes without figuring that out, the easier things continue to be for Georgia in the SEC East. I will tell you, while we celebrate Florida losses, we don't celebrate anyone's injury. Bad news for Florida in that Marco Wilson apparently is out now for the year. He makes that known on social media after the game. Something I will have a little bit more fun with is a Darius Lemons, the running back, who, I don't really think of him as being, one of the main cogs in the Florida offense anyway, announces immediately after the game that he's transferring. This is one of those classic, Mark Richt's lost control of Dan Mullen type situations here, where it really seems like the floodgates of bad press sort of come flooding at one time here for Florida on this one. And for Dan Mullen, who I think may have had some reservations about going to Gainesville in the first place because of the pressure that comes with the job, I'm not quite so sure that makes it any easier to lose to Kentucky here, your first SEC game out of the gate. All right, let me do a couple other things here before we get to our R.S. Andrews Cool Under Pressure Performer of the Week. First of all, on Texas A&M, I will say I was wrong about this. I thought that Clemson would cover this spread in College Station. The fact of the matter is A&M just hasn't been very good at home in the recent past, but they played very well at home on this Saturday. I don't know what it means for the Aggies the rest of the season. I mean, frankly, I think it's easier to get up emotional for a big game like this than it is sort of have a consistent level of performance week to week. I'm still a little wait and see on the Aggies, but I must admit they played better than I expected and maybe even got robbed by a bad call at the end that could have made this one even closer. And by the way, how happy were you to see Mike Bobo, who's been through so much here over the course of the offseason with his health issues, see his Colorado State team get a win against Arkansas on Saturday? They travel to Florida this Saturday, by the way. So we'll be rooting hard for Bobo again, but so happy to see him get a big win after what has been a really rough summer for him on the health standpoint, and the Rams got off to a real slow start this season too. So seeing him get a win against Arkansas was really fun for us here around DawgNation Daily. And I guess one more quick story to kind of get to here as well. Tory Gurley, who I legitimately had never heard of before his, quote, guarantees that Georgia would beat or get beat by South Carolina, I guess, and we had this story for you at DawgNation.com. You can check that out. He sort of waves the white flag of surrender. He put the Georgia G on his Twitter avatar and, basically congratulated Georgia for, for going out winning against South Carolina. I think a lot of people care about this story a lot more than I do because guarantees from someone I've never heard of just don't mean a whole lot to me. I still think he should come on this show and do 100 push-ups. I mean, if you're going to guarantee something, I think you should sort of put something up for that. And I don't want $1 out of his wallet, but, a little calisthenics I don't think would kill anybody there. So I guess he does the right thing by giving Georgia credit. Nonetheless, it all kind of comes to an end there, and we'll make that your SEC through. All right, time now for our R.S. Andrews Cool Under Pressure Performer of the Week. And for me, there are a lot of guys you could give this to, but I want to give this to a Georgia cornerback, DeAndre Baker, for a couple of reasons here. You know what happened with Baker going back to last week with the things that Deebo Samuel said, and I thought Samuel really made a fool of himself because, Samuel's a good player, and I told you all that last week that I thought he was a good player, but who is he to sort of have that level of bass in his voice? Gets, for the most part, shut down in the game. I think for the most part, Baker, including the touchdown that he scores to start the game, really equates himself admirably in terms of playing in a big game. I love the quote that Baker gave to DawgNation and other reporters gathered after the game. Here's what Baker said about stepping up and doing battle with Deebo Samuel. I love this quote from him. Check this out. Here is DeAndre Baker saying that I proved something today, but I didn't really learn anything about myself. I know I step up in big-time games. That's just who I am. I do my thing in big games like this. So I just let everyone else do all the talking, and I let my work on the field speak for itself. That's Georgia cornerback DeAndre Baker talking about sort of stepping up there against Deebo Samuel, and I really thought that Baker had a really good game, and I'm not surprised by that. Baker doesn't seem surprised by his own performance here as well. That's just the kind of thing that he does for the Georgia Bulldogs. I thought he did it on Saturday, and I thought he comes across looking like a class act, and the way that Samuel kind of tried to goad him into some trash talk, and Baker was content to let his trash talk being done with his pads on the field. As far as, Baker being involved a lot here, it almost seemed like at the beginning of the game, South Carolina was sort of targeting Baker, sort of throwing in his direction. Kirby Smart was asked about that and kind of offered his own clarification on the decision there by Will Muschamp and Brian McClendon to sort of go after Baker. Here's how Kirby Smart saw that.
I don't know that they were challenging Bake as much as that was where the read went. Most of those balls were thrown into the boundary. He was into the boundary. And when they were on the other boundary, they went to Tyson Campbell. So I don't know that it was just going at Bake. It was just where the read took him.
Well, the read may have taken him to DeAndre Baker. Baker answers the challenge, and Georgia gets its victory. And for that, DeAndre Baker is our R.S. Andrews Cool Under Pressure Performer of the Week. And speaking of R.S. Andrews They invite you to keep cool no matter how hot it gets this summer. With the keep cool no matter what, guys, R.S. Andrews clean, screen, trained, and timely techs specialize in giving old systems new life. You call, they come, you're cool. It's as simple as that, period. Now, if your old system is cooled its last, R.S. Andrews also has you covered there as well with replacement AC systems custom designed to last with available financing. So you can keep your cool by calling the ones that DawgNation trusts. R.S. Andrews, online at rsandrews.com. Now, I will say this. That was about the hottest game that I can remember at any point in time being in. Chip says, it's typically hot in Columbia. It really is. The configuration of that stadium, the sort of geography around Williams-Brice kind of makes that tough. But, boy, I was dying on Saturday. And if you want to see me sweating and all pasty face with my sunscreen all on, go check out the dog walk video we did before the game. That's probably the worst I've ever looked on camera because I just sort of put the sunscreen on. The sweat had made my hair sort of poof out. That was not a good look, but it was a fun time to be in Columbia. Enjoyed seeing the dogs get a victory. All right, we will wrap up here, and we'll do so with our Gator Countdown here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza, because we love seeing the Florida Gators lose. We saw that happen on Saturday against Kentucky. We think it's going to happen again on October the 27th, 47 days from right now. Georgia beats Florida again. It's our Gator Countdown right here on a DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. Let me also say one more thing here. I was talking about DeAndre Baker a moment ago, what I thought, Baker was able to do. The pick six for a touchdown set the tone early in the game, and Baker sort of standing up to the challenge of Deebo Samuel. Impressive in that regard from him, I thought. He does get a couple pass interference penalties, but the fact of the matter is, as Kirby Smart said, he was being aggressive. Those weren't cheap. He certainly wasn't, beat on the play. Just, getting physical and bumping. On the other side, maybe not as great a day for Tyson Campbell. He's responsible probably for the 2 touchdowns. I don't mind that. That's good experience for him. He'll learn from that and be better in the process, and we'll try to do the same thing and see you tomorrow right here on DawgNation Daily. And on video, let's get some comments here. A good, brisk pace to a Monday show. Now plenty of time for you to react on everything that you saw. I'd love to hear from you. Bruce Eklund, thank you very much. This is an important reminder as well. He says, BA, no need to sweat how much you look, no pun intended. Your looks are not why we tune in. Well, thank you for that. I guess what it is that, so I joked about this on our Northside Hospital post-game show 2 Saturdays ago, that y'all used to sort of give me a hard time because I got this big fat face, and while overall I take the sun pretty well, if I don't have any sunscreen on at all, I will get kind of red kind of quick because there's a lot of ground to be covered here. So I try to put the sunscreen on. But on this past Saturday, knowing we're going to drive 3.5 hours, whatever it was, to get there, I decided to wait and apply the sunscreen once we got there, thinking that was smart. Instead, it just turned me into, I look like Bozo the Clown. Because something about my hair, and this is more than y'all care to hear about, but I've got a lot more hair here than I do here. So as it gets sweaty, it sort of sticks out this way, and the sunscreen sort of turns into this white deal. But as Bruce Eklund says, that's not what y'all are watching for anyway. Kyle Miles, a really good point. J.J. Holloman getting a catch on Saturday. Glad to see him getting involved. Yeah, I really I like Holloman a lot, and I was glad to see him get in there. Richard Morrow says Georgia should be number 2 in the nation, and I kind of agree with this. And ultimately, this doesn't really matter very much in terms of the polls having very little impact on, at least theoretically, very little impact on the actual decision-making process, which is the College Football Playoff Selection Committee. But I do like polls, and I like hot takes. I like debate. I like sort of week-to-week assessments. And I think if I was a poll voter, I've never been one. If I was one, I'd probably forget to send it in. But if I was one, I think polls are supposed to sort of change dramatically from week to week based on the data that you have available to you at the moment. I think that, make the preseason poll be what your thoughts are on how you think the season's going to unfold. But then the actual poll, once the games begin, I do think that needs to be reflective on what you've actually seen on the field. And from that standpoint, if I'm voting this week and I saw, Clemson go on the road as, around about the same favorite that Georgia was against an unranked Texas A&M team and struggle to get that win, Georgia as a double-digit road favorite against a ranked South Carolina team and dominate in the fashion that they did, I'd have to consider not only leapfrogging Georgia over Clemson, but I've got a strong consideration here about making Georgia the number 1 team in the country from that standpoint. Now, it's not because I necessarily am sure that Georgia's better than Alabama, But just based on the evidence that we have thus far, I think that in the early going here, among the most impressive wins really for anybody is Georgia winning at South Carolina. I'll tell you that I think that Georgia winning at South Carolina is more impressive for me than Washington getting beat by Auburn in a neutral site building there in Atlanta. That's still Auburn with the geographic advantage. Washington's traveling 3,000 miles. That's a game that Auburn ought to win. Now, you can say that Georgia ought to beat South Carolina as well. They were a pretty sizable favorite. But this was also a circled game for South Carolina, playing at home, kind of a lot going for it, and Georgia completely dominates. The list of wins thus far this season, more impressive than that for me, are short. And that's just kind of my overall philosophy on how I would fill out polls if I was a poll voter. That's also probably why I've never been invited to participate in one of these. Nikki Hester says, anyone see the post game with Rico and the other dude? I assume he means Rico Dowdle. I did not see that. Kirby Smart did address the idea of it being sort of a chippy environment. That's just sort of to be expected, I guess. I thought it was very interesting. DeAndre Baker, after his touchdown to start the game, and yes, I know he let go of the ball before it crossed the end zone, and I guess it falls in the end zone. And I guess officially Jawan Taylor, I think, ends up getting credited with that. But, it's DeAndre Baker's touchdown. He's the one that ran it all the way back. There was a lot of in the face jawing between Baker and some other guys right away. So, yeah, this had the feel of that SEC environment, right? I mean, that deal where, Kirby and Muschamp may be friends, but a lot of these players did not seem too friendly with each other. And by the way, I loved what we did in the forum on Saturday, forum.DawgNation.com. A lot of sort of in-game stuff. And I thought Jeff's in-game stuff was particularly good because he was actually on the sideline. I was up in the press box, which might as well be like a courtyard hotel across the street from the stadium because it's a pretty long ways away. Now it's air conditioning, so I'll take that. But Jeff's perspective from the sideline gave him a little bit different angle. He was saying there was a lot of stuff going on between Debo and Baker all day long there. So to Nakia's point, a lot of chippiness there. Frank Crowder says that A&M will start challenging Alabama in the West very soon. I kind of agree with Frank on this. And if you've been kind of a long time, listener or viewer to our program, that's a point that I've sort of made in the past that, I think that first-year coaches, I think it's a really challenging role to be in. For whatever reason, first years are just hard. But over the course of time, given the fertile recruiting soil from Texas, given Jimbo Fisher's history of being a national championship coach, given the brand of football that he plays, I think it's a tough time right now to be Ed Orgeron at LSU. I think Joe Moorhead at Mississippi State, who would fashion himself as trying to build something. I think A&M could make it tough on him. I think Gus Malzahn at Auburn, for the most part, is probably fine. But even his sort of status as, I'm a pro wrestling fan. I've joked before that Auburn's the intercontinental champion of the SEC. They're not, on the main event, but they're sort of the best of the rest. They're the sort of mid-card champion of the SEC. Auburn's status as intercontinental champion of the SEC might be somewhat challenged by A&M here in the future as well. So I agree with the commenter on that. All right, let me pop over here to YouTube before the YouTube folks commit anarchy over here. I don't want anyone to feel shortchanged. K9 Blues says Centel did do that breakdown of players in the bus for us. A little misleading stat was there was only being 17 players in the bus who were there before Kirby. I only count 19 of those on scholarship. But yeah, so I love Jeff's freshman report at DawgNation every single week. It's always great. Army Dog Charlie says, BA, I think we can keep Missouri's passing game from exploding this year. South Carolina only had one long pass. Yeah, I think that what Missouri is going to do, or at least attempt to do, will be pretty similar to what South Carolina tried to do on Saturday as well. Because, Jamon Moore's not at Missouri anymore. That was that really great deep threat receiver they had a year ago. So in terms of really challenging Georgia's secondary, I for some reason, I don't think that Missouri's going to try to do that as much this year as they did in 2017. First of all, Georgia's cornerbacks just run a lot better now. And yeah, I know that Campbell, had a rough day on Saturday. I'm sure it was not as fun a bus ride back for him as it was for a lot of the other Georgia players, but I ain't the least bit worried about that, if you'll pardon the bad grammar. I'm not worried about that whatsoever. I think that Campbell will use that and be better for it. And I think that in terms of those long, deep routes that Missouri scored on a couple times a year ago against Georgia, I don't think Campbell's allowing those. I think he's running step for step. He's using his size and athleticism, and he's just batting that ball out of the air there. And as far as the commenter said in terms of how Missouri tries to attack it, I think they will try to neutralize the Georgia pass rush by getting rid of it quick. And Drew Lock's probably accurate enough that he can do that, although it is worth pointing out that his overall accuracy numbers a year ago were not very good. But I think that's what he's going to try to do, those quick decisions, quick hitters. And, for a lot of Georgia fans, it's going to be this deal of, much like, where was D-Rob? The other sort of what's going on here question from Georgia fans is, where's the pass rush? There's, there's very little pass rush because of how quickly South Carolina is getting rid of it. This is one of those things where there's nothing more satisfying than watch your team wrap up a quarterback and drag him to the ground, unless you're in the NFL, where it's likely going to be called a 15-yard penalty. But it's really satisfying to watch your team get a pass rush going. For right now, though, that option just may not be available to Georgia. I think that Georgia right now is just going to let these teams sort of, back themselves into a corner with one-dimensional football. And on Saturday, another example of that. And I wrote this in the forum at halftime, that, Georgia's only up 10. South Carolina had some reason to make a little bit of noise after the halfback option touchdown pass. But I flat out wrote in the forum that Georgia's not going to get upset by a team that can't run the football. And on Saturday, yes, Georgia may have, been neutralized by a sort of a quick-hitting passing game that that prevented any kind of pass rush from being established. But also Georgia was able to sort of make sure that everything sort of stayed underneath, everything sort of stayed, relatively safe. And I'm guessing that Georgia will do the same thing to Missouri. I mean, Chip said this, that the game against Missouri on the road in a couple of weeks may unfold very similar to what happened against South Carolina on Saturday, where Missouri hangs around for a little while, but can't run the ball, can't stop Georgia from running the ball, and eventually it just sort of turns into this. I mean, it's like, watching an anaconda eat a goat. I mean, it just there's this sort of slow digestion here, and that's kind of what Georgia's sort of doing here to South Carolina. The subject of Demetrius Robertson also comes up again here as well. I wonder how much of this is, hey, a lot of receivers to choose from. It just so happens other receivers got chosen. Or, as Chip pointed out, we had Trey Blount at one of our Marlowe's broadcasts. And this is back before he came to Georgia. This was right before he signed with UGA. And he said that he really bought into the philosophy that exists at Georgia of you got to block to get the rock. And, Trey said that so well when he was with us there at Marlowe's. And that's obviously true. I mean, Terry Godwin probably took a little while to learn that. I don't think Godwin was Kirby's favorite player in 2016, but by 2017, he was among his favorite players because he'd sort of bought into that block first, rock second, get catches after you've proven yourself to be a physical wide receiver. I mean, maybe this is one of those things where Kirby's not going to call him out publicly, but wants him, to embrace that part of the game. Keith Fold says, BA, we're seeing the birth and development of a dynasty. That's certainly what I hope happens. There's obviously a lot of football left this season, but the one thing I do believe that the South Carolina game proves is if the dynasty comes, here's how it's going to happen. It's not going to be with every playmaker getting every stat we could have ever sort of fantasized for him. It's going to be about being the kind of team that's just miserable to play. I mean, just miserable to play. On a day in which most fans, if given a choice of staying in the stadium or going home, chose to go home, can you imagine how much it just must be terrible to step on the field, on either side of the ball, by the way, or on special teams against Georgia, knowing that the guy that you're playing against has probably played a lot less than you have because of Georgia's depth, has practiced it such an intense way that now the game is somewhat easy, or at least easier, and that lives for nothing more than to make, really full contact with you. I've got to imagine the experience of playing Georgia right now is not too pleasant. Let me get one more and then I'll jump back over to Facebook. K9 Blue says, BA, what surprised you the most while watching the South Carolina game? That's a really good question. Maybe I should do a positive and a negative here. Let me do positive first. I think my positive surprise is not that I didn't expect, good things from MECOLE HARDMAN, but he's really come a long way. I don't know that I thought he would be as polished as he looked on Saturday. It's really pretty impressive, how much he's grown. Remember, I mean, he only learned to play the receiver position last year. Spent his freshman year at Georgia as a defensive back. Spent his high school career as kind of sort of a do everything, almost like wildcat quarterback. Receivers is a specific skill set. It's not just athleticism. It's a specific skill, and he's really learned it very well. I'm really impressed by how much he's grown. My surprise for the negative, and I meant to mention this in the show and just sort of ran out of time. I guess it'll take us 3 days to break down everything that happened in this game. Georgia's inside linebackers right now still have a long way to go. Now, eventually, I think they're going to be saved by the emergence of some of the freshmen, especially Channing Tindall. I think that's eventually going to happen. But for now, that's a group that still has a little ways to go here. Obviously, no one expected Roquan Smith-like performance from that group there in the middle, but they've got some work to do. And I expected that, but I guess it's probably a little bit more of a concern than maybe you would have thought. Maurice Carter says that MECOLE could be NFL bound after this year. Could be. Monty Moon says Hardman is fast. We knew that, but he looks strong. That's a good point, Monty. He does sort of have this stoutness that he didn't have a year ago. Let me get the rest of Monty's quote here on this. Monty says he shrugged off, broke free from defenders like it was nothing. That was impressive. He's also just become a surefire guy catching the football. Exactly a year ago, that was not the case. Dropped some passes against Notre Dame, and the fact that he was being targeted shows you that Jim Chaney, Kirby Smart, James Coley, who was the wide receivers coach at the time, they believed in him, but he dropped those passes. He's become a sure target, and he's just a little bit more stout. He was also my vote, and you can go back and watch the dog walk video. We put it up at DawgNation Facebook, DawgNation YouTube page. He was also my vote for best dressed for the dog walk on Saturday. I thought his ensemble was really impressive. Very impressive. Gary and Christian Gulisano says, BA, is it fair to say that Georgia dominated, in your opinion, the second best team in the SEC East? What does that say about the rest of the East? Great question. And I do believe that if you gave me the most likely outcome here, I think that South Carolina will sweep the rest of this division. I do. And I guess Missouri's the only other unbeaten in the division at the moment, but that doesn't mean a whole lot to me. They played Wyoming and some other team I've never heard of. That doesn't mean a whole lot to me that they are 2-0. I think that South Carolina's got a lot more defensively than I think that Missouri does right here. So in a head-to-head matchup, I think that South Carolina probably beats Missouri. I think they'll beat the rest of that division. I'm not going to believe too much in Kentucky despite the road win at Florida. I think that Georgia put a lot of distance between itself and South Carolina, but I'm not so sure the Gamecocks aren't capable, because they did show some things. I mean, Bentley's a pretty good quarterback. I think Rico Dowdle's a better running back than South Carolina's had in quite some time. And, it's not just Debo at the wide receiver position. Brian Edwards had more than 100 yards receiving on Saturday. So I think South Carolina's going to win some games. They are just not in the category of Georgia. Now, this is from James Bryan. It's just, this is in bad taste. And, of course, I'm kidding. But he says, we need to get Cam Akers to transfer from Florida State because he's now realizing he made a bad mistake. I mean, the reason why I laugh about that is because so many people that watch Florida State these days are sort of doing the same thing. They go shopping on that roster because, Florida State's had some recruiting wins, as of late. Seminoles are going to have that. And there's a lot of, why'd he go there? He ought to be here. And, obviously Cam Akers is probably the number one name there because he is a very good running back on a very bad team right now. Florida State almost lost to Samford on Saturday. I said Samford, not Stanford, Samford. They almost lost that game, but it's kind of funny. What James says there in the comment section is what so many other people have been saying as well. Hey, that guy should have come here, or that guy should have gone to whatever school. There's a lot of window shopping on that Florida State roster right now because the assumption is some of those guys may be looking to get out of Dodge. Ray Brandon says, was there a single drop by a receiver on Saturday? It's a good question. I don't really remember one. That's a good question. Philip Sharp says, BA, how concerned are you with Jaden Hazelwood commitment now? It looks like we won't pass much, and Oklahoma is throwing it all over the yard. Philip, I would dispute that just slightly because I don't know what the overall numbers end up looking like for Georgia against South Carolina, but Georgia threw the ball 45% of the time against Austin Peay. I think that for Georgia, in a blowout game like this, they're just not going to throw the ball as much. So, when we say we don't know, we don't know what, let me pull up the stats here. You say, well, Georgia's not throwing the ball as much. I think that Georgia's going to throw the ball in close games. If it plays one and it has, big time opportunities there, it's going to throw the football. It threw the ball 45% of the time in sort of a tune-up game against Austin Peay. But overall, against South Carolina, I don't know that's, necessarily, the blueprint for what the rest of the season is going to look like. In total, there are 19 pass attempts in the game. There are 48 rushing attempts. That's a pretty big balance or imbalance in favor of running the football. But it's also a blowout game. I'd love to see some first half numbers on that because it seemed like Georgia did throw the ball a decent amount in the first half. Maybe I'm wrong on that. But I'm guessing that a lot of those rushes came in the second half. So, if anything, look at the way that Georgia's developed MECOLE HARDMAN. He's gotten a lot of compliments on the show today from myself and a lot of Georgia fans. Jaden Hazelwood, as a high school player, is a lot more of a polished receiver than MECOLE HARDMAN was. So I think that Hazelwood, if anything, may see some things with this Georgia offense that he likes right now. And if the hypothesis that some have shared about Robertson is true, and he needs to be more physical to sort of earn Jim Chaney and Kirby Smart's trust, that's not going to be a problem for Jaden Hazelwood. Hazelwood is not one of these, finesse, pardon me for saying this way, Oklahoma-style wide receivers. That's just not what he is. He's very physical. So, Hazelwood, I think from the word go, is likely to excel in a way that some other receivers maybe have to sort of learn. I think Hazelwood likes the contact. There's plenty of video of him at the high school level almost taking it. Justin Dinkins on YouTube says it shouldn't turn away recruits. If Alabama has had Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley go there, why can't we get a top receiver? Yeah, and I think I agree with that comment. I think Georgia's throwing in enough right now that a receiver is not going to be turned away. This is not a team that only runs the football, but it's mostly going to run the football when it's blowing out a team on the road. Maurice Carter says you'll see Georgia throw more against better defensive lines. That's true. And let's face it, there are, and we'll make this our final comment because we got to get ready to go here. Georgia's offensive line is going to be good against every team that plays this season, but there are much better defensive lines still yet to come. Auburn for sure. LSU probably. Braden Fajoko, the Texas Tech transfer, gives a little extra beef to that LSU defensive line. Obviously, Clavon Chesson's injury changes the pass rush dynamic there a little bit, but the LSU defensive line will be better than South Carolina's. The Auburn defensive line will be much better. Georgia plays Alabama in the SEC championship. That will obviously be a top-flight defensive line. Really, even Florida is not a terrible defensive line. Not a good team, but not a terrible defensive line. There are better defensive lines to come for Georgia than the one it saw against South Carolina. As the one commenter mentioned, that's when you maybe see the passing game be more a part of this Georgia offense. Georgia just didn't have to throw the ball very much on Saturday. So good stuff. Really fun here on the program today. We got a lot more to come at DawgNation this week. We'll have DN90 coming up in just a little bit here on the DawgNation video channels. Kirby Smart press conference coming up around noon. Obviously, a good coverage of that from Chip Towers, Mike Griffith there from Athens. We're back tomorrow. DawgNation Daily presented by Marcus Pizza. Jeff Santel will be on the program. We'll talk to him about the freshmen that play in this game on Saturday. We'll do more as a part of our Marlowe's Tavern Tell-All. Don't forget, we're going to be at Marlowe's again next week. Not this upcoming week. Not this week. But next week, it's going to be on Thursday, getting you ready for Georgia, Missouri with our DawgNation Big Game preview. So I hope you'll join us and check that out. And just have a great day. Thanks for being with us. We'll have the podcast posted if you missed a portion of our regular broadcast. And we'll see you tomorrow morning at 10 for DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza.